Not continue on joining. No.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the session today. We'll just give it a minute for people to join us who might be joining slightly late. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's People Puzzles webinar. This is the second in our mini webinar series where we try and cover key issues of the day, particularly those queries which are brought to us via our client base and the wider network that we operate in across the UK. And obviously the COVID-19 pandemic looms large above us all, and today we will look at some crucial areas that we think are impacting on businesses at the moment. We've defined these for the session today as culture-related issues. And as we see the return to work agenda opening up even more since last week's government announcement, it's becoming really clear that business owners and businesses are being tasked with key responsibilities around their people, which they have to take very seriously. For example, how do we ensure that workplaces are safe for employees to return to and carry out their duties? How do employers deepen the trust between them and their employees to ensure engagement and productivity go hand in hand? And what techniques and strategies can be deployed in terms of current best practice to build a positive, welcoming culture that employees feel that they're a part of, whether they be working from home remotely or in the workplace, or indeed a mixture of both. My name is Jim Lister, and today, and I'm the Regional Director for Yorkshire and the North East for People Puzzles, and today I'm joined by colleagues Andrea Richardson and Kerry Howard, two of our People Directors. In today's session, Andrea will address the issue of what is meant by meaningful communication strategies and how important they are, whilst Kerry will look at the employee and people well-being agenda. Both Andrea and Kerry will reference what's happening for them on the ground as they work with their client base. And we'd really like to kind of keep in that territory of being very practical today. What can you take from today's call, which you can take back into the workplace where you are operating to help make the difference? So People Puzzles has been providing strategic HR and people director services for the SME market now for over 10 years. And at any given time, we're employing around 60 people directors, such as Andrea and Kerry, working with their client portfolio base. This gives us an enormous wealth of experience to be able to draw and to find solutions to the kind of problems that we're talking about today. We will endeavour to answer all of your questions which you offered as you signed up to the webinar today, and you can always add to those questions via the Q&A facility. So in last week's webinar, we looked at the government announcements, which began, of course, the start of the return to work process. And I think it's fair to say that some of those announcements left some room for manoeuvre and interpretation, and particularly here in Yorkshire, there were some good takes on that with a little bit of artistic license thrown in. In our webinar, we looked at one or two key issues. For example, what structural issues are you facing around your workforce? How are you beginning to combine on-site and working from home, which may now well be part of the new norm? How do you shape your company in terms of its design moving forward? We also looked at people processes, how you might reinduct your workforce. And we looked at that really thorny question around if you've given all the reassurance to your staff and your teams and people are still refusing to come back to work, what do you do about that? So today we will build on that and we'll move around the People Puzzles business analytic tool, our pinwheel. We'll move from structure and people processes into culture and touch on some leadership responsibilities. And to begin the session today, I'd like to move on to Andrea.
Thanks, Jim. So I'd like to start with, do you have a communication strategy? Communication is a critical part of employee engagement, which in turn promotes better performance, employee retention, and well-being. Employees are more likely to engage and contribute when there's an open communication culture, and good employee communication will help people to understand the company's purpose and strategy, identify with its values, and develop a sense of belonging by understanding how they contribute to its wider purpose. I'd like to just look at 3 factors that might require some change. First of all, understand any barriers that there are for your teams. How are they coping with working from home? They might be homeschooling, they might be caring for someone that's vulnerable. At the moment, I think we're all finding that home life and work life is becoming very blurred. How are you going to communicate with everybody? Consider different generations, what approach works for them. For instance, for millennials and the Generation Z, messages need to be brief, they need to be precise, and ideally sent from a channel other than email. That just really doesn't work for that group. Your team are looking to you for reassurance and guidance. They might be worried about whether they have a job to come back to, and certainly they'll be keen to understand how the company is doing. These are worrying times for everybody. So a few ideas that you might want to think about using. It certainly starts with the CEO. Always start with good news. Include some shout outs for people that have gone above and beyond. Share company, team and individual successes. And it's important to tackle the difficult questions that you might be asked. Be open and honest as much as possible, as this will lead to increased trust from your team. Keep the briefing short, but make sure that your personality comes through. In this new virtual world, managers are using applications such as Zoom, Teams, Slack, or even a combination of all of those. But be flexible and remember what works for one person may not work for another. It's unrealistic to expect that everybody will actively use those communication channels. The point is, it's important to give a great deal of thought to whom you want to reach and to choose the most appropriate tools for actually doing that. You might want to think about setting up some specific groups for people to aim and help with around hobbies, interests, parent support groups. Helps to give a sense of we're all in this together. Try and introduce some fun during the week. You might organise a weekly quiz, a regular virtual team lunch. You could ask people to post pictures of their pets and their favourite coffee cup. And yesterday with one of my clients, we did the last pre-lockdown photo that people had on their phone, which went down really well. We got lots of comments, lots of engagement with that. You could even make a fun team video or a TikTok. This helps people feel part of a team and can lift mood. Pulse surveys and employee surveys are a useful way of checking in with your team and gauge how they're feeling, but just be mindful about just looking at average numbers. People aren't averages, they are individuals. So you may score 4 out of 5 and think you're doing a great job, and on the face of it you are, but look at those people who are scoring low in the survey, as they will need some additional support. And include those that are on furlough leave. Whilst you can't force them to join in, it's important that they feel connected to the company, particularly for when they're returning to work. They might be living on their own, and the company interaction may be the only interaction they get during the day or the week. So how do you start thinking about re-inducting into work? Well, remember that feeling after a long holiday or after maternity leave? It's hard coming back into work. People that have been on furlough will find it quite a shock to the system to come back into work, and with it functioning maybe differently. They'll be coming back to new ways of working, perhaps a new layout, no canteen. They might be expected to wear itchy and uncomfortable PPE for up to 8 hours a day. But equally, it's an opportunity to get the company and the country moving again, and a great opportunity to put your culture and your values really to work. A recent study has been completed after the government announced its COVID secure guidelines to help employers adhere to safe working practices. And you can see from that 55% of those surveyed feel uncomfortable about actually returning to work. At a client I'm working with, I've recently sent a return to work survey to employees to understand what concerns they have and what issues they may have about returning to work, health concerns, homeschooling, etc. The issues that have been raised by the team have included things like, how will you maintain social distancing measures at work? How am I going to cope with juggling homeschooling? As well as concerns about travelling into work safely if they're using public transport. Having this individual survey completed has enabled me to have an informed conversation with the management team so that we can incorporate this into our return to work plans and our people communications. So here's an example of a communication plan that I've put together, and this section is about hygiene and cleaning. Remember to communicate clearly with the team about coming back in. What day do you want them to come in? What time? What do they need to wear? Are you going to do that through mass emails or individual communications? It's a huge communication challenge and will take time to organise and enact. And just think about who's going to be taking the lead in that. So as mentioned, at the client I'm supporting with their communication plan, we've done this in light of the return to work questionnaire. And yesterday we held groups meetings over Zoom to talk them through the plans about coming back into work in the office. We did this in small meetings so that we're able to deal with any questions that we had coming up. And next week, we're conducting a virtual walk around to actually show people what the changes are. So we've embraced a fully collaborative process. Employees have been able to comment on the proposed changes and ask questions all the way through. So in terms of keeping it alive, information and government updates are changing daily, as we know. In the last few days, the COVID symptoms list has been updated to include loss or change to sense of smell and taste. And COVID testing is now open to everyone, not just key workers. As we talked about earlier, you could do some regular employee attitude surveys. You might ask them whether people feel informed. Is the communication regular and consistent? Do they feel listened to? And check in what concerns they have. But remember, any communication campaign must have clear aim. Look at how many people have watched the video you might have posted. How many people have opened and read the email you sent? How many participants are on your Zoom call? Ensure you experiment, see what works, keep adapting, make it fun. That way it becomes memorable. So in the study I mentioned earlier, aside from health and safety concerns, the YouGov study I mentioned unearthed that employees' fears also extended to personal well-being. And Kerry is going to cover this element in a bit more detail.
Thanks, Andrea. So I'm going to talk to you today about your wellbeing strategy. So first of all, I'm going to start with the why. Why do we need a strategy for wellbeing? Well, research shows that people who feel supported are 27% more likely to stay with their employer long term. When we talk long term, we're talking about 5 years or more. And with the cost of replacing a member of your team upwards of 30k, it makes business sense. Healthy people at work also perform better and take less time away from work for ill health. Supporting our people also makes sound business sense, as this leads to increased engagement, which in turn leads to better business results. A sound wellbeing strategy and associated activity reduces presenteeism, stress, anxiety, and low morale in your workforce. And as a good employer, simply, it's the right thing to do. So that's the why. Moving on to the actual strategy, it's not just about the soft stuff, the free fruit and the giveaways. It's more around competitive advantage and what you want to do to show that you value your people. You will want a vision for your well-being. So sit down and think about what you actually want to achieve. It's about supporting and engaging your workforce and also attracting new talent. Certainly what we're seeing now around COVID is the companies that treat their staff better and do more are the companies that will be attracting new people to them once we're in the position to hire again. Your strategy should be flexible. So what fits right now may not fit in 6 months. So you should always bear this in mind. Make sure that you can adapt it to meet the needs of the business and the needs of your staff going forward. Also, involving your staff will be key to your wellbeing strategy being a success. Actually ask your staff what they'd like to see. Ask them what they value, rather than just doing stuff to them. Also, link it back to your comms. Think about how you message what you're doing so that it lands right with your people. For me, allocation of budget is also a key driver. If you allocate budget to your wellbeing activity, I think that's a key indicator showing that you're serious about what you want to achieve. And finally, and equally important for boards, is return on investment. You want to show what your strategy's achieved. And the way you can do this is by monitoring reduction in absenteeism, number of leavers, and also if you do pulse surveys and annual employee surveys, you can look at your engagement scores to see whether it's been a success. So, what can we do? I've broken this into 3 sections that I want to look at with you today: mental health, physical health, and financial health. So kicking off with mental health, obviously this week is Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK, so quite topical. And certainly with all the COVID stuff happening right now, I think mental health is at the forefront of most people's minds. So first of all, do you have an employee assistance scheme, or EAP as they're fondly known? Do you know who runs it? Do your employees have the detail? I think right now, certainly clients that I'm working with are reviewing their EAP, looking at what it offers and looking at whether or not it works. Commonly, the rate of take up for EAP is 20 to 30%. Now you're probably sat there thinking, 20 to 30%, is that actually worth it? But if you think about it, if you've got 1/3 of your workforce using your EAP at any one time, think about the results that you're going to get. The positivity that comes from that, the fact they'll feel better, reducing absence. There are lots of apps out there at the moment that help people with mental health. Many of them are free and some of them are low cost. So working with some clients recently, I've trialled 2 paid for apps. One is called 87%, and that's an app that focuses purely on mental health. Recently, 87% have also offered their app free to SMEs. So go on their website, have a look. I'm not sure whether that offer is still running. It was running until the end of June, but certainly worth having a look. The other app I've trialled for a client is an app called Wellspace. That offers a mix of mental and physical health. Very useful. It has polls where people can check in. They can talk about how they're feeling, talk about how they slept last night. And there's also a dashboard on Wellspace where you as the employer can get some information, observing obviously confidentiality. So you won't find out individual detail, but you'll get a sense of how your workforce are feeling. Free apps that you can use include Action for Happiness. This is an app that has a lot of resources and a lot of positive affirmations. And the other one that I've used is one called Headspace. And that does a lot around guided meditation and mindfulness. So certainly at the moment where people are feeling stressed and anxious, that can certainly help. So looking at physical health, many local gyms will offer you a discount. So local companies approaching local gyms when they're open, obviously. That's something that you can really push with your staff as a benefit. Those that use a gym already absolutely will benefit from a discounted rate. You can set challenges within your organisation. So a lot of people have smart watches where they can count their steps. You can set challenges in the office, so you can have a competition for most steps walked. The other thing you can do, many companies have a cycle to work scheme. In a lot of places, this has been gathering dust. Not many people use it. Perhaps now is the time to have a look at your provider, see what they offer, and maybe look at a relaunch. Looking at financial well-being, this is all quite new, and something I did just before lockdown for one of my clients. I produced a fact sheet for the staff around what they could do to get help. So certainly during the situation where a lot of your staff may be furloughed, some people may be worrying about the future, worrying about how they're going to pay their bills. You don't need to pay a lot of money for this. You don't need to pay an independent financial advisor. All I did for the client was I got mortgage company details, we published that, we published utility companies, and we published some hints and tips around what you can do to help yourself reduce your bills. It's certainly been very topical in the news right now about payment holidays on mortgages. So it may be something that you want to offer your staff to help them while they're furloughed. The other thing I want to touch on is vending machines. So we all have them in the office, and I guess while people are working at home, they're probably not being used. But certainly the clients I've worked with, when you look in their vending machines, they are all full of crisps, chocolate, fizzy drinks. If you want to focus on well-being with a softer side, maybe look at what's in your vending machines. The other thing I think really, really important, and if you take one thing away from what I've said today, it's about giving your managers the tools to help. So quite often managers feel out of their depth talking about mental health. And running mental health awareness training just gives managers the confidence to spot signs in themselves and others and help signpost people to what's available. Some research I've been doing recently, there's reams and reams of mental health awareness out there. So you can do one that's accredited and provides a certificate at the end. You can do webinar or online based, but certainly do have a look. And if you do need any help, I think we can point you in the right direction. For me, the final point I want to make is the key to your success here is going to be listening to your staff, asking what they want, and taking steps to give them the help that they need.
Great. Many thanks to Andrea and Kerry for that input, and all sorts of practical advice there, which is, as I said at the very beginning, something that we really wanted to emphasize in these webinars is tools that you can take away and use in the workplace. Just to say that we will be sending on the slides which we're featuring today, and we'll keep in touch with you via email. We've got a few minutes where one or two questions have come up, and inevitably, and I'm going to ask Andrea and Kerry just to chat this through with us, inevitably that question, that thorny issue around return to work and those people who do not feel confident about coming back to work and are refusing for whatever reason. What's the advice that we can build on that we already know from your experience, Andrea and Kerry, that can start to reassure businesses about how to address that really difficult issue?
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, I think most of that is going to be a fear-based reason for not wanting to come back in. So I would say talk to people first to understand what their concerns are, and listen to what they have to say. So it might be they're fearful for their own safety, fearful for safety of people that are living in the house with them. So you really should just start with understanding what that fear is. What do you think, Kerry?
I agree. I think definitely talking to people is the key to success here. And I think as well is looking at whether you can make adjustments to accommodate somebody's return to work. So if it is people that they live with, if they're juggling homeschooling, I think, anything you can do to help, A, to reassure that person, and B, be a little more flexible right now to help them get back to work, I think are only good things.
I think if they're still fearful, then maybe allow them to take some holiday if everybody else is coming back in. They can see how others in the team are adjusting, and then you can have another conversation with them once they know that some of their teammates have actually come back in, and that might just help as well.
Great. Yeah, great advice, I think. And just following on from that, another question that's come up is people who are then coming back into the workplace, how do we deal with any anxiety or, enhanced uncertainty that arises because suddenly, it's a new world again, isn't it? And they've been at home for some months. How do we offer that reassurance to deal with that?
Thanks, Jim. I think so. Reassurance comes in many different forms for many different people. And I think we've already touched on it today that one size isn't going to fit all. I think once you've got people back, again, and I feel like we're just banging on about the same old stuff, it's communication. So talking to them, finding out what their issues are. And I think also making adjustments to people's workspaces. So I think we've all seen it. I think, putting more space between people, maybe having less people in the office at any one time. I think all of those things are going to help reassure people and reduce the anxiety.
Yeah, I agree. So I think in terms of the meetings that I was conducting yesterday with the teams, because we'd included them in some of the initial thinking and then we were able to show them the plans and talk them through it in a lot of detail, it really did help to reduce that level of anxiety. There's still some, and we're following up with one-to-one meetings, but the more you can include people in what you're doing and reassure them about the safety measures that you're taking, that will certainly help.
Yeah, and we did think that we would probably try and cover three questions in this piece today. So the final question that's come up is, in any kind of downsizing or redundancy situation, how do we use the tools that we've been talking about today, particularly to try and guide through that scenario as best possible for everybody?
Yeah, it's never an easy message when you have to get to that. And I know that the furlough scheme has been introduced to try and avoid that, but inevitably there will be some downsizing that needs to happen. And we saw on the news yesterday that Rolls-Royce are now having to make 9,000 people redundant. But it's about taking time to consider your messages. Treat people with respect and consider how you want them to feel. You don't want to end up on the front page of the news for the way that you have handled this. So a 2-minute Zoom call to tell people they're losing their job is not really going to be the best way. Think about how you would want to be treated yourself if it were you. Kerry, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. Something I saw in the news, a local company here have made 450 redundancies already. And what they did, they met with individuals. So it was all done on a one-to-one basis. And, I think where you've got staff furloughed, it's very easy to sometimes forget about them or to curtail your message. But I think it's giving people the time. And again, honesty, I think that's all people really want. Be honest with me. If you can't give me a job now, can you give me a job in 6-9 months? I think we're all in uncharted territory here, and it's as you said, Andrea, it's all about the respect.
Yeah, and if you can't give me a job, can you keep me on furlough leave while the government scheme is still available? But at least you're talking to me and you're doing everything you can to help.
Okay, once again, great advice, and really grateful to you both for joining us today, Andrea and Kerry. It's been great to hear your thoughts, and particularly, your experience on the ground working with your client base, which is covering the kind of agendas that we've been talking about today. From our perspective, we hope you've got plenty from it today. There's 1 or 2 questions which have come in on the chat, which I'm afraid we've not got time for today, but we will endeavour to keep in touch with you, send on the slides and remain in touch with you via email, and we will get round to answering those questions as best we can. Before we leave, just really a point of caution, which we brought up last week on the webinar, which is you've heard so much today and from last week about the responsibilities being placed on businesses and yourselves as senior leaders. Our advice would be, please don't slip into the trap of becoming the COVID director. I mean, really, there's an opportunity here to use really good delegation skills, either internally or bringing in external resource. And that's certainly where ourselves are being placed at the moment by many of our clients to help coordinate that view on the ground. That allows you to remain a strategic leader. And I think in this time, that is exactly what's required of you. So just a note of caution there, really. We look forward to seeing you and hearing from you again in 2 weeks' time. We're going to take a week's break over the bank holiday, where we'll return with a view of leadership, really, through uncertainty, the ultimate leadership challenge through crisis, and what good role modelling looks like, and some tips and practice on the ground that's happening for us all. So without further ado, I'd just like to thank you all for attending today and joining us once again, to Andrew and Kerry for their input. We hope you found it useful. In the meantime, stay safe, and thanks once again. Cheerio.